Shaquille O'Neal thought he'd left his past behind, until a little black girl in a Savannah hotel lobby looked up at him and whispered, "Dad." She had his eyes, his face, and a mother no one was allowed to talk about. The deeper he digs, the more he uncovers a system built to erase voices like hers and silence men like him. Now Shaq isn't just fighting for a child, he's fighting to expose a truth hidden beneath Southern hospitality. Some secrets aren't buried, they're dressed in uniforms and paid in cash. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. He had millions in the bank but never lost the memory of sleeping on floors. The sun hit differently in Miami. It wasn't just the brightness or the heat, it was the way light settled on the shoulders of the city, golden and unbothered. Shaquille O'Neal, known to most as Big Shaq, had found peace here. Not the kind of peace that comes from silence or luxury, but the kind earned through scars, endurance, and the long arc of redemption. He had more than he ever dreamed: houses in 3 states, investments in tech and food chains, and a social media empire that never stopped growing. But if you asked him what mattered, he'd tell you it was none of that. It was giving back. That morning he stood outside a public elementary school on the northwest side of town, surrounded by kids clinging to his arms like vines. Some had just met him, others had seen him on TV, dunking over giants, laughing in commercials. But in person, Shaq wasn't a brand, he was a beacon. He laughed hard, hugged harder, and remembered the names of kids he'd only just learned. It wasn't for show. This wasn't press. There were no PR handlers. Just a retired legend walking into neighborhoods with forgotten zip codes, handing out shoes that weren't even in stores yet, and asking single moms what bills he could cover. He hadn't forgotten where he came from. Not even close. There were nights he could still remember the exact sound of the wind slipping through cracks in his mother's old apartment. Lucille O'Neal had worked 3 jobs feeding 4 kids off groceries from church donations and vending machine dinners. Back then Shaq used to pray. Not for fame, not even for a basketball career, just for a full fridge. He never forgot the smell of mold in the corners, the feel of cockroach traps beneath mattresses, or the sound of her sighs after long shifts. So when a city councilwoman called him last year about investing in public housing reforms, he didn't hesitate. He wrote the check that same day. Miami knew Shaq not as a retired athlete, but as a present force, someone who didn't just cut ribbons, but built the foundations beneath them. Later that afternoon, in a sun-drenched restaurant off Biscayne, Shaq sat with a business partner discussing a venture into mobile education units for rural schools. A waitress approached, smiling nervously, holding her phone close to her chest. "I don't mean to interrupt, Mr. O'Neal, but my son, he's in a wheelchair, and he watches you every night." Shaq stood up before she could finish, took the phone, recorded a personal message for her boy, then handed her his business card. "Tell him I want to meet him. I'll bring him some gear. You tell him Big Shaq got him." The woman nearly cried. He never liked the word celebrity. He didn't feel like one. Not when there was still so much work to do. Fame, to him, was just a spotlight, and you had to decide what you'd shine it on. That night, as the city lights bled into the sky, Shaq sat alone on his condo balcony, legs stretched out, toes in socks too loud for anyone else's taste. He sipped a protein shake, looked out over the skyline, and let the silence sit. It had been a good day. Another one. His phone buzzed. An email, invite only, marked confidential. Subject: Legacy Capital Summit. Keynote request. The kind of event where the old money met the new, where billionaires swapped blueprints behind closed doors. He'd been invited before and passed, but this time something pulled him in. Maybe it was the location, Savannah, Georgia, a city draped in Spanish moss and complicated history. He opened the file. Venue: the Magnolia Crown Hotel. Date: 3 weeks from now. Purpose: to discuss economic reform and generational philanthropy. He leaned back thinking. Savannah. His mother once worked in a textile warehouse near there in the 80s. He hadn't been back since college. Not that he avoided it, but something about the South, deep South, still stirred things in him. A kind of ancient tension. You could feel it in the streets, the way some storefronts looked too clean, too polished, like they were hiding old blood. But Shaq was never one to back away. Especially not when legacy was the topic. He replied to the email, "I'm in. Book it." The next week moved fast. He flew to LA to appear on a charity special, then to Atlanta for a foundation dinner, and finally back to Miami just long enough to pack 2 bags and kiss his mother on the cheek. Lucille, still radiant in her 60s, warned him to stay out of trouble. "South Georgia's got ghosts," she said, half joking, half serious. "Don't go waking none." He laughed it off, but the words stuck. He arrived in Savannah on a bright Thursday afternoon. The The air smelled like salt and pollen. The driver, a sharp-looking man in a navy suit, took him through cobblestone streets and under willow trees, so wide they looked like they touched the sky. And then the Magnolia Crown appeared, not towering, but proud. A grand hotel draped in colonial charm, its white stone walls glowing under the southern sun. Inside, the staff stood in perfectly spaced rows, smiling, polished, efficient. A soft jazz tune played on a vintage record system in the lobby. The air was cool and smelled of eucalyptus and leather-bound books. The general manager, a tall man with silver cufflinks, greeted him warmly. "Mr. O'Neal, it is an honor." Shaq nodded. "Appreciate you." A young porter led him to his suite on the 8th floor. Plush, modern, but with preserved bones, crown molding, antique doors, a grand mirror above the fireplace. He tipped the porter $500 without blinking. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Shaq said, smiling. The window view stretched over the garden, and beyond that a glimpse of the river where barges moved like sleeping beasts. He walked to the window, hands on hips, soaking in the stillness. But something tugged at the edge of his mind. Not fear, not dread, just a pull, like an echo, a weight in the air that didn't belong to him. That night he explored the hotel, noticed the artwork on the walls, all southern, all curated, but strangely absent of black faces. The staff remained polite, professional, and distant. He passed a cleaning crew in the hallway. Black women, most of them older, eyes low, movements tight. He nodded to one. She smiled, but not with her eyes. It unsettled him. The next morning, he walked past the ballroom on the first floor where the summit would be held. Guests were arriving, suits, diamonds, air kissing their way through pleasantries. Shaq wasn't one for small talk. He preferred kitchens to cocktail bars. That's when he saw her. A little girl standing near the service elevator. Small, maybe 8 or 9, skin warm brown, hair coiled tight, eyes wide and round, eyes that looked like his mother's, eyes that looked like his. She stared at him without fear, without awe, just familiarity, like she'd seen him in her dreams. Then she said it, barely more than a whisper. "Dad?" Time didn't freeze. It recoiled. And before he could react, a woman in a housekeeping uniform rushed over, scooped the girl into her arms, and disappeared behind the staff door. Shaq stood still. For the first time in years, he had no idea what came next. It smelled like old money and lemon polish, but something underneath stank of silence. The Magnolia Crown didn't just stand, it performed. It wore its age with pride, like a southern debutante decades past her prime, but still clinging to the glow of youth. Its halls whispered with the weight of history. Its chandeliers hung heavy with expectation, and its marble floors gleamed like they'd never been touched by tired feet. For tourists, it was elegance. For locals, legacy. For the workers within, it was something else entirely. Shaq knew prestige when he saw it. He'd spent his adult life in penthouses, flown private across oceans, shaken hands with kings and CEOs. But there was something different about this place. Not the kind of different that impressed, the kind that made the back of your neck itch, like a smile that stretched too far across the face, hiding something just behind the teeth. The general manager gave him the usual warm greeting, recited the rehearsed pleasantries, and handed him a sleek keycard in a silver envelope. Everything felt just a little too curated, from the harp music echoing faintly through the lobby to the antique oil paintings, each depicting grand southern homes, wide fields, and faceless servants always blurred in the background. He noticed it right away. There were no portraits of black excellence, no nods to the civil rights history the South tried so hard to forget. The decor was an unbroken hymn to whitewashed nostalgia. He took the elevator up to the 8th floor, noting how the concierge held the door for him with rigid precision. At first glance, the staff looked flawless. Polished shoes, pressed uniforms, every move like choreography. But when Shaq looked closer, something cracked beneath the surface. The black employees didn't speak unless spoken to. They didn't make eye contact. They moved like ghosts, present, but never seen. Every time he nodded at one of them, they'd nod back with the kind of half-smile that didn't reach the soul. He'd seen that look before, in underfunded schools, in crowded shelters, in places where people weren't just working, they were surviving. He entered his suite, immaculate, designed for comfort and opulence. Velvet chairs, gold trim, a fireplace flickering digitally beneath a portrait of a cotton field at sunset. Tasteful to some, tone-deaf to others. Shaq stood in front of it, silent, wondering who chose the artwork, who they thought would look at it and feel soothed. He unpacked, changed into a black linen shirt, and went down to the dining level. The restaurant, the Rose and Ledger, served high-end Southern cuisine with reinvented names. Smoked Carolina Grace was just brisket. Magnolia Buttergrain was cornbread with overpriced truffle oil. The waiter, a young white man named Bryce, spoke with rehearsed enthusiasm, called him sir twice in every sentence, complimented his career like reading a Wikipedia summary. Across the room, at the edge of the bar, he saw two middle-aged men in blazers. One nudged the other and pointed at Shaq. They weren't hostile, but they weren't respectful either. More like fascinated. The kind of curiosity people get when they see something rare. Not a legend. A black man, with power in a place that was never built for him. After dinner, he roamed the halls alone. His mind wasn't on basketball or speeches or even legacy summits. It kept circling back to that quiet unease. The hotel was too silent, too measured, like it was trying not to be heard. Then just past the lobby near the service elevators, he saw her. A little girl, small and still, standing by a bucket cart of cleaning supplies. She wasn't playing, wasn't moving, just watching. Wide eyes, no smile. Her hair was braided in neat rows, her uniform an oversized dress shirt that fell past her knees. She didn't fidget, she didn't blink, she just stared. Shaq stopped. Something about her struck him with a quiet force he couldn't name. Her face, it wasn't just familiar, it was his eyes, his nose, the same solemn expression he used to wear when he was her age, curled up on the floor of his mother's apartment, trying to stay small in a world that didn't make room for him. She tilted her head slightly, like recognizing a song from far away. "Dad?" she whispered. The word hit him like a wave of heat. He froze. She didn't say it like a joke, not like a fan confusing a celebrity for someone they knew. It came out of her like truth, soft, sure, the kind of word a child wouldn't dare say unless they knew. Before he could step forward, a woman appeared out of nowhere, housekeeping uniform, mid-30s, hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes alert and tired at the same time. She scooped the girl into her arms with practiced urgency. "I told you to stay in the back," she whispered sharply, more worried than angry. Shaq tried to speak to ask, but she turned without looking at him, and disappeared through the staff door marked authoriated personnel only. He stood there for a long moment. The lobby remained quiet. No one else seemed to have noticed. A white couple passed behind him, laughing about a cocktail they'd just tried. A bellboy wheeled a cart past, humming softly. But inside Shaq's chest, a storm began to brew. That girl looked exactly like him. Not kind of, not sort of. Exactly. And she didn't say, "Are you my dad?" She said dad, like it wasn't a question, like it was a fact. He returned to his room, but he couldn't rest. The bed was too soft, the air too still. His thoughts raced backward through time, through nights on the road, brief encounters, people he might have hurt without knowing, but nothing added up, no names, no faces that matched. Until now. He called down to the front desk and asked for a list of current housekeeping staff. They said that information couldn't be disclosed. He asked about the child. They replied, "Sir, we don't allow children to be on shift." "I saw one," he said, "just now." The woman on the line paused. "I'm sorry, Mr. O'Neal. There must be some mistake." He hung up without another word. Something wasn't right. Not just about the girl, about the entire building. The politeness, the curated silence, the way every black worker avoided questions with their eyes. It wasn't just fear, it was programming. As if they'd been trained not just in service, but in submission. That night, he walked the halls again. This time, quieter, slower. He noticed the older black bellhop flinch when a white guest raised their voice. Saw a young black maid run her finger across a mirror 4 times before moving on. Saw the line cooks walking in from the back with tattered shoes, heads down, moving like they didn't exist. Shaq had known struggle, had known racism. But this wasn't just about hardship. This was deliberate invisibility. A system designed to keep people present, but powerless. Standing in plain sight, yet unseen. And somewhere in the middle of it was a little girl who called him dad. He didn't sleep that night. Not because he was afraid, but because something ancient had stirred in him. Something deeper than legacy, deeper than image. The kind of thing that doesn't let go until the truth rises, no matter who wants to keep it buried. She looked at him like a child looks at a bedtime story come to life. It wasn't just the word, it was the way she said it, like it had always belonged to him. Shaq stood in the marble corridor of the Magnolia Crown's lower level, rooted to the spot as the image of the girl burned into his mind. The echo of her voice, soft, unsure, but intimate, still rang in his ears. One word, 2 syllables, and yet it cracked open something buried under years of calm. Daddy. The service door had swung shut behind the woman who carried her away. Her arms had wrapped around the childlike armor, but the panic in her eyes didn't look like parental instinct. It looked like fear of being seen, fear of recognition, of truth being spoken aloud. Shaq walked back to the lobby in a haze. The chandelier lights didn't glimmer the same. The curated jazz soundtrack now felt staged, artificial. Behind the front desk, a young white clerk typed on a monitor without looking up. Another staff member offered him a polite nod as he passed. Everything about the Magnolia Crown seemed perfectly composed, and somehow completely dishonest. He sat in the lounge near the fountain, where the sound of falling water filled the silence with something vaguely soothing. But his heart beat too fast, and his thoughts moved in loops. He closed his eyes. What had she seen in him? What had he seen in her? That face, those eyes, the curve of the jaw, the way her left dimple showed when she blinked hard. It was like looking at a photo of himself in second grade, back when Lucille used to press a comb through his hair with one hand and fix his shirt collar with the other, before sending him out the door. He wasn't imagining it. This wasn't the innocent mistake of a fan, or the wild hope of a child with an absent father. That little girl didn't guess he was someone. She knew. Shaq stood abruptly. He returned to the elevators, pressed the button, and watched the screen crawl slowly downward. When the doors opened, he stepped inside alone, heading back to the 8th floor. As the door shut, he caught a glimpse of a cleaning lady peeking from around the corner. She vanished as quickly as she appeared. In his suite, he poured himself a glass of water and paced. His thoughts stretched back across years through the blur of games, flights, charity events, and off-season trips. The 90s had been a whirlwind. The fame, the endorsements, the parties. For every moment he remembered clearly, there were 10 that blurred like fogged glass. But one thing he'd never been careless with was people, especially women. He respected his name too much, respected his mother too much. Still, he'd traveled. He'd met people. A charity event in Newark, a speaking appearance in Trenton, a community clinic he helped open. He had been in so many cities, taken so many photos, smiled for so many cameras that his memory sometimes trailed off like static. What if she was his? The possibility was too loud to ignore now. It wasn't just vanity. It wasn't projection. That girl looked like him. And that meant something. Whether it was truth or coincidence, he couldn't walk away from it. Not now, not after hearing her call out to him like she was trying to rewrite her own story in real time. He went to the hotel phone and dialed the front desk. The same clerk answered. "Hi. I need to speak to your staff director," Shaq said, voice even. "I'm sorry, sir. Human resources isn't available at this hour." "It's not HR. It's urgent. A woman on your cleaning team, early 30s, African American, medium build. She had a daughter with her earlier today. I need her name." A pause. Shaq could hear the quiet shift in the clerk's posture, the slight rise in breath. "I'm afraid I can't disclose staff details, especially not about their families." Shaq exhaled slowly. "I understand that, but there's a serious concern. That child, she spoke to me. I think she believes I'm her father." More silence. "I'm sorry, sir," the clerk said, "but our team is trained not to bring children into workspaces. Are you sure it wasn't?" "I'm sure," Shaq cut in. "She called me Dad. You tell whoever's in charge that if I don't get answers, I'll get them another way." He hung up. There was no knock on the door. No call back. Just stillness. It confirmed what his instincts already knew. This hotel didn't just protect its luxury, it protected its secrets. The next morning, he returned to the service corridor. It was quieter than usual. No sign of the woman or the child. No sign of any staff, in fact. The hallway felt freshly scrubbed, too clean. Even the scent had changed. No longer lemon polish, but something closer to sterile bleach. He checked the staff room door, but it was locked. A red light blinked on the access panel. He scanned the area, then walked toward the freight elevator, pressing the call button. The doors opened to reveal a single laundry bin and a clipboard clipped to the wall. He pulled the clipboard free. It held a rotating cleaning schedule. No names, just room numbers and floor assignments. He flipped to the previous day's log, nothing handwritten, just a printed grid with timestamps. Who didn't put names on a staff schedule? He snapped a photo with his phone and stepped back out. The elevator doors shut slowly, sealing off whatever lay behind them. By mid-afternoon, the lobby had filled again with guests. Attendees of the summit arrived in clusters, women in pearl blouses and stiff heels, men in tailored suits and forced laughter. The conference banners now hung from gold stanchions near the entrance. Legacy Capital, Wealth, Progress, Vision. Shaq moved past them without acknowledgement. His focus was narrowing, sharpening. He approached a bellhop, a tall man in his 40s with graying temples and a stiff smile. The man seemed surprised when Shaq spoke directly to him. "Hey, I'm looking for someone. Housekeeping. She had a little girl with her, yesterday." The man stiffened. "Children aren't allowed on the service floor, sir." Shaq leaned in slightly. "I didn't ask about policy. I asked if you've seen them." The bellhop's eyes flicked left, then down. His voice dropped. "You should stop asking about that, sir." Shaq frowned. "Why?" "Because the last person who did doesn't work here anymore." Shaq opened his mouth to ask more, but the man was already moving, wheeling his cart briskly toward the guest elevators, disappearing into routine. Shaq turned, his jaw clenched, heart racing, not from anger, but from confirmation. There was something here, something wrong, a system that didn't just hide people, it erased them. And whoever that woman was, she was in the middle of it. And so was that child. He left the hotel that evening to clear his mind, walking along the historic Savannah riverfront. Tourists snapped selfies. Street musicians played slow jazz near the benches. But his mind remained with that girl, her voice, her certainty. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know her mother's story. But he knew this. A child doesn't say dad unless she means it. And he wasn't going to let her disappear like she never existed. Not on his watch. The deeper you dig into history, the louder the buried screams get. The morning light didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like exposure. Shaq woke early, eyes dry from a restless night, and limbs aching in a way that had nothing to do with age or weight. The questions from the day before had lodged in his ribs like metal slivers, and no amount of pacing or breathing could shake them loose. He moved slowly through the suite, brushing his teeth as the news played on the muted TV in the corner. Stocks, sports, another protest out in Chicago. But none of it touched what was happening here, inside this too-perfect hotel, under the surface of a face he couldn't forget. He dressed with intention, pulling on dark denim and a solid navy button-up. The hotel was waking, voices echoing faintly down the hallway, carts squeaking across carpet, the slow engine of luxury grinding into motion. Shaq didn't head to the breakfast lounge or the gym. He walked toward the service corridors again, past the ballroom, past the security camera on the ceiling that tilted slightly as he passed. The hallway where he'd seen the girl yesterday looked different now. Sanitized, rearranged, like it had been reset overnight. No sign of the cart, no child, no woman. The door the woman had vanished through was closed, locked, the keypad blinking steadily in red. He checked the lobby. Nothing. He approached the front desk again. Calmer this time. Colder. "The woman from housekeeping. She had a daughter with her yesterday. I need to speak with her." The clerk, a different one now. A woman with tight curls and guarded eyes, barely looked up. "There are no children on shift, Mr. O'Neal." That must have been another guest. Shaq's voice dropped just enough to shift the air. "She wasn't a guest. She called me dad, and now she's not here." The clerk blinked once, then glanced toward the office door behind her, as if weighing what she was allowed to say. "I'm sorry, I really can't help you with that." He left the desk, heart drumming with slow, hot certainty. This wasn't miscommunication. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was cover-up. Back in his room, he sat at the edge of the bed and opened his phone, scrolling through his email archives until he found what he was looking for. An old calendar file. A charity tour schedule from the spring of a string of East Coast cities over a 3-week span. Part of a campaign for a youth literacy program. He opened the Newark date. May 19th. City Court event. Youth clinic. Then, private reception. Renaissance Center. Hosted by Dillard Foundation.
That name pulled something from the deep.
He dug deeper, pulling up archived news from the event. Photos from local newspapers. And there it was, a scanned photo. Grainy but unmistakable. Him in a tan suit, holding a trophy, smiling for cameras. To his left, a line of volunteers in white t-shirts. One of them, third from the right, was her. Selena. The same face. Younger, less guarded, but unmistakable. He zoomed in. Her hand rested on a clipboard. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't looking at the camera. Her eyes were locked on him. Shaq sat back slowly. So it was her. The girl was real. The mother was real. The connection wasn't fantasy or accident. It was history. But why now? Why here? What were the odds of her ending up in the same hotel decades later? He needed answers. He called someone he hadn't spoken to in 5 years, Chasmon Green, an old PR guy who'd cleaned up Shaq's messes when his career was at its hottest. Chaz was retired now, living in Arizona, but still had a memory like a vault. Shaq? The voice crackled with early confusion. Damn, man. It's been a minute. You good? I need a name, Shaq said. Back in '95, Newark, Dillard Foundation event. There was a woman there, Selena. A pause. Then, yeah, I remember. Quiet girl. Real smart. She volunteered at 3 cities, if I'm not mistaken. Disappeared after the tour. No one knew why. Shaq's stomach tightened. Did she ever try to reach out? Chaz exhaled, static crackling. To you. I don't know. We screened a lot back then. Mail, calls, fan stuff. It was chaos. What's this about? Shaq hesitated. I think she has a kid. A little girl. Looks just like me. Another silence.
Damn, Chaz said again. You sure?
She called me Dad. More static. Careful, man. You're a target in places like that. Savannah got 2 faces. One you see on brochures, one you don't. I'm already in it. He hung up and stared at the wall for a long moment. If Selena had reached out, and the system around him filtered her out, if a child had grown up without his name, his help, his protection, what did that say about all the good he thought he'd done? He stepped out of his room again, this time heading to the loading dock entrance at the back of the hotel. The path took him through a narrow hall lined with staff lockers and time clocks. A woman mopping near the storage room looked up, startled, then ducked her head. Shaq walked past her and found the bulletin board. Laminated schedules, birthday announcements, an emergency exit map. But no employee list, no HR contact, no names. He snapped another photo. Someone came around the corner. A white man in a manager's blazer. Mid-50s, red face, forced smile. Sir, this area is restricted to guests. Shaq didn't blink. I'm looking for someone. Her name's Selena. She works housekeeping. The man's face barely twitched. I'm afraid I don't know all the staff personally. Can I assist you at the front desk? You can assist me by not lying. Where is she? The man shifted, defensive now. I'd appreciate it if you'd return to the guest areas, Mr. O'Neal. We have procedures here. I'm not asking about procedures. I'm asking about a child who disappeared overnight. That landed. The man stiffened, then quietly said, You need to stop asking questions. Shaq stepped closer. Or what? A pause. The man's voice lowered. You're not the first person who's asked about her. That changed everything. Shaq's pulse jumped. What happened to the others? The man didn't answer. He just turned and walked away. By the time Shaq returned to his suite, the afternoon sun had begun to slant across the walls. His phone buzzed, an anonymous number. He hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was low. A woman. Don't trust the front desk. Don't trust management. And don't ask about Selena in public. Shaq's throat dried. Who is this? I used to work here, until I asked questions. Now I clean motel rooms on the highway. What happened to her? She didn't run, the voice said. She was removed. The line went dead. That night Shaq couldn't shake the feeling that everything he thought he knew about control, about influence, about power, didn't apply here. This hotel wasn't just haunted by history. It was hiding something alive. And now Amira, the child who called him Dad, was gone. Not checked out, not relocated. Gone. It didn't come with a return address, just a heartbeat wrapped in paper. There are certain moments in life when silence arrives not as comfort but as a warning. A space too quiet, too still, where every object around you feels like it's watching or waiting. Shaq had been staring at the ceiling for over an hour when it came. The envelope. He didn't hear footsteps, didn't see a shadow move under the door, just the soft scrape of paper sliding across the carpet. It was enough to make him sit up heart alert before his body even moved. There was no knock, no voice, just a perfectly sealed cream-colored envelope resting by the edge of the doorframe. He picked it up slowly. No hotel branding. No name. No handwriting. Just weight, physical and emotional, waiting inside. He opened it. 2 photos. 1. A faded print from the 90s, slightly curled at the corners. Shaq recognized it instantly. He was standing in front of a gymnasium stage, tan suit, microphone in hand. Selena was to the side, younger, face calm but guarded, clipboard clutched to her chest. It wasn't a photo taken for publicity. It was a candid moment, captured by someone watching closely. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't hiding either. The second photo struck him harder. A baby, 6, maybe 7 months old, wrapped in a pink blanket, wide dark eyes staring up at something above the camera. Her face was unmistakable. She had his nose, his jawline, the expression he'd seen in mirrors since he was 12. It was Amira, the same little girl who had called him Dad 2 days ago, now immortalized in a photo taken long before he ever knew she existed. Below the photos, a folded slip of paper. Just one sentence. You don't know the whole story. No signature, no date, but the implication pressed hard against his chest. Someone had been watching. Someone wanted him to know. But not everything. Not yet. Shaq stood by the window, clutching the photos in one hand. Outside, the sun was just beginning to burn off the morning fog. Savannah's historic skyline shimmered gently in the heat haze, its brick and oak and southern charm now laced with suspicion. The hotel's silence had become louder since yesterday. Staff still passed by, but their eyes seemed more cautious now, their greetings more mechanical. Housekeeping no longer came unless called. The smiles had thinned. Something in the air had shifted. He went downstairs with the envelope tucked under his jacket. At the front desk, the concierge was new again. A young black woman this time, calm and attentive, but trained like the others. I need to confirm something, he said, voice low. Selena Wells, and a child, Amira. Did they check into this hotel under any name, any floor, any service log? She hesitated, typing with careful precision. A beat passed, then another. She looked up with a gentle shake of the head. I'm sorry, Mr. O'Neal. No one by that name is currently registered, and there's no record of a child on the premises. Shaq leaned forward, keeping his tone steady. Then tell me why I have photos of her in this hotel. Why a child called me Dad and disappeared the next morning. Why your staff tells me to stop asking. The woman's eyes didn't change, but her voice softened. I'm not at liberty to speak on internal matters. Is security reviewing footage? I wouldn't know. I want to see the guest log. That's restricted information, sir. Shaq exhaled through his nose, resisting the rise of heat behind his chest.
This isn't about privilege. It's about a child.
I understand, but my hands are tied. He turned away, not because he believed her, but because he could feel the tightening around him, the walls of secrecy pulling closer. The Magnolia Crown wasn't just maintaining its reputation. It was guarding something much deeper. The kind of secrets that didn't show up in public court cases or news headlines. The kind that lived in quiet corridors and beneath polished floors. He walked the perimeter of the building, slipping past the main lobby into side hallways. The photos stayed in his hand like proof no one wanted. He asked 2 more staff members if they'd seen the woman from housekeeping. The first shook their head and walked off. The second pretended not to understand English. It was like Selena and Amira had been erased, not just from the guest registry, but from reality itself. Shaq returned to his suite just before noon. The air inside felt thinner, like someone had been there while he was gone. He checked his belongings. Nothing missing, but the blinds were slightly cracked, the way they hadn't been before. He sat on the edge of the bed and spread the photos out on the table. There was a message here. Someone had gone through the effort to print these, deliver them, and remind him there was more beneath the surface. But it wasn't a threat, not yet. It felt more like a warning, or an invitation. He thought back to the photo of baby Amira. It wasn't just the resemblance. It was the timing. The date scribbled on the back in faded ink. February 1996. That matched the Newark timeline. 9 months after that event. 9 months after the photo with Selena. He'd been there. She'd been there. And now, so was their daughter. But why come here? Why this hotel? Why not find him through safer channels? Why not reach out when the world knew where he lived, worked, gave speeches, funded schools? Because maybe she had tried. And maybe someone or something had blocked her path. Shaq reached for his laptop. He searched news archives for the Magnolia Crown, looking for lawsuits, scandals, complaints. The results were clean, too clean. Reviews sparkled with language that felt planted. No mention of labor disputes, missing staff, whistleblower claims. It was sanitized perfection, a PR fortress. Until he searched the phrase, Magnolia Crown whistleblower. One result. A forum post from 2008, archived in a worker advocacy blog, a thread from someone using the handle Lost Witness 83. Worked at Crown for 6 months. Saw staff disappear. Girl named SW. Got reassigned after she spoke up about undocumented workers. Said she had proof. Next day she was gone. Security said she quit, but her locker stayed locked. Her last paycheck was never collected. They cleared her name off everything like she was never here. Shaq's chest tightened. SW, Selena Wells. She'd been here before. And she'd been erased before. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like armor. The fear was still there, not of danger, but of discovery, of what he might uncover if he kept pushing. But under that fear was something louder. Anger. Not loud or reckless, but patient and deep. The kind of anger that moved giants. He looked down at the photos again. His past had walked right into his present. It hadn't asked for attention. It hadn't screamed. It had just looked up and called him Dad. And now it was being hunted by silence. He stood. The hotel might not be ready for the whole story, but he was. They cleaned the rooms, but they weren't part of payroll. Shaq had spent most of his life reading defenses, on the court, in business, even in boardrooms, where smiles masked agendas. But nothing he'd ever faced looked like the Magnolia Crown's operation. This wasn't about pride, or legacy, or image. This was about something colder, something calculated, and it wore politeness like armor. Back in his suite, the morning after receiving the anonymous photos, he began making calls. Not the kind that left a paper trail, the kind that existed behind closed networks. He reached out to an old contact at a real estate investment firm that once considered buying the Magnolia Crown during a bankruptcy scare in the early 2000s. A woman named Tessa Langford, known for her bluntness and encyclopedic memory. She owed him a favor. It took 3 hours for her to return the call. The first thing she said was, "Why the hell are you digging into that place?" Shaq didn't flinch. "I think they're hiding people, employees. A kid's gone missing. So has her mother." There was a pause, then a quiet, sharp inhale. "It wouldn't surprise me." Tessa didn't speculate. She delivered. They run their payroll through a third-party service. Only partial staff are on file. The Crown's housekeeping and kitchen staff are rotated through what looks like a vendor list, but I couldn't trace half the names. Some of the IDs used don't even pass federal verification. We flagged it during due diligence, but no one wanted to touch it. The place is protected. By who? Shaq asked. Old Savannah money. Private foundations. Quiet ownership. Layers of LLCs stacked like Russian dolls. Anyone ever report it? Not officially. There was talk. One woman filed a claim in Ciro. She vanished. The case never made it past mediation. The Crown settled and sealed it under NDAs. After that, nothing. The words landed like lat. Shaq thanked her, wrote it all down in a private notebook, and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just about Selena or Amira. This was a system. He left the hotel grounds that afternoon, heading into the older part of Savannah, where cobblestones met crumbling plaster, and the tourists didn't wander. He visited 2 employment offices and asked about Magnolia Crown's staffing partnerships. The first denied knowing anything. The second paused too long before answering. "We have applicants who say they've worked there," the clerk admitted, voice low. "But when we request verifications, nothing comes back. Most of them don't have tax forms, just cash receipts, or nothing at all. How are they getting hired?" "Word of mouth." Whispered, like it's a favor you don't refuse. Shaq stepped outside into the hot afternoon and stood against a brick wall, sweat forming at his temples. Invisible labor, silent hiring, no protections, no records. People working inside a 5-star hotel, right under chandeliers and colonial paintings, while being treated like shadows. He knew racism. He'd lived it in locker rooms, in boardrooms, in backhanded compliments wrapped in corporate handshakes. But this was something else. This was slavery rebranded. Oppression without chains, but just as cruel. And the worst part, it thrived because no one noticed, because no one looked. He returned to the hotel, fire simmering beneath his usual calm. In the elevator, a white couple entered behind him. The man glanced over and chuckled. "You here for that summit? Heard the big names are rolling through." Shaq nodded but said nothing. The man continued. "Place runs like a damn dream, huh? Not a speck of dust in sight. The staff's like clockwork." "Too clean," Shaq said flatly. The man laughed again. "Exactly." He wasn't joking. Back in his suite, Shaq reviewed the hotel's app. Under staff services, there was no list of departments, no recognition of personnel, just general categories: housekeeping, request service. No names, no profiles, no way to leave feedback. It was dehumanized by design. He called the front desk and asked to speak to the general manager. "I'm sorry, sir," the clerk said. "He's unavailable at the moment." "I'll wait." "I don't believe he'll be available today." Shaq didn't argue. He hung up, opened his notebook, and wrote a list of every inconsistency. Staff without badges. Cleaning crews who vanished overnight. Locked employee hallways. No child records. No check-in logs. Payrolls with no trace. A photo from '95 with no public record. He stared at the list until it became a map, and the only place it led was deeper. Later that evening, As the hotel buzzed with cocktails and speeches, Shaq slipped into the West Wing, past the ballroom. He found a side corridor, half-lit, unused, and walked until he reached a utility door marked Maintenance Access, Staff Only. It wasn't locked. Inside, pipes ran overhead, wires bundled neatly in trays, but the walls were lined with old lockers, dented, dusty, and tagged with faded masking tape labels. One of them was marked SW13. Selena Wells. He didn't open it. He just stared. It hadn't been cleaned out. That meant she hadn't left voluntarily. That meant she hadn't quit. He stepped back into the hallway and found a discarded paper on the floor. A cleaning rotation sheet, 2 weeks old. The names were mostly initials, but some had been crossed out in red. SW13 was one of them. So was MT19, KB02, DA07. He photographed it all. Back in his room, he loaded the photos onto a secure drive and encrypted them. He couldn't risk them disappearing too. The Magnolia Crown had built its legend on charm, on history, on the illusion of Southern hospitality. But the truth lived behind that charm, in the hallways where names weren't remembered, and workers weren't documented, and children could vanish without anyone blinking. And now Shaq was blinking less and watching more. He didn't need a confrontation. He needed the truth. And he was just getting started. Sometimes people vanish not because they're weak, but because they're dangerous to the wrong people. The thing about truth is it doesn't whisper forever. Eventually it finds a voice, even if it comes from the shadows. Shaq stood in front of locker SW13, the metal cold beneath his hand. The initials were smudged, the masking tape barely holding to the dented steel, but the meaning was loud and clear. Selena Wells hadn't quit, she'd been erased, and that locker unemptied, untouched, was proof she hadn't left by choice. Somewhere behind the polished chandeliers and Southern hospitality, something sinister pulsed through the hotel's walls, and Shaq was getting close enough to feel its breath. That night, he didn't sleep, not from fear, but from clarity. The threads had stopped unraveling, now they were starting to braid together. Around 2 a.m., an encrypted message hit his backup email. Anonymous sender, no greeting, just a single file titled Confidential Sub-W Fall, .pdf. He opened it. 15 pages of internal documentation, employment records, falsified time cards, HR memos, all pointing to one truth. Selena Wells had filed a formal complaint about undocumented labor practices at a former hotel she worked at near Macon, Georgia. That was in 2009. 1 month later, the hotel mysteriously burned down in an accidental fire. No casualties, no arrests, but the timing was too convenient. Page after page traced Selena's name through temp agencies, janitorial contracts, and finally into a relocation request filed through a federal program. The heading stopped Shaq's breath. Witness Protection Program request, coded referral. Whistleblower status, Depth of Labor, Human Trafficking Division. The request was redacted. No confirmation of approval. No closure. Just a name lost in a digital system designed to forget people for their own safety. But if this was accurate, Selena wasn't just a maid. She was a witness. And someone wanted her invisible. The next morning, Shaq reached out to someone he hadn't contacted in a decade. Martin Covey, a civil rights attorney who had once handled a wrongful termination case for one of Shaq's foundation schools. Covey had a reputation for working deep cases, the kind no one else touched because of who they might offend. I need this verified, Shaq said, forwarding the file. And I need it fast. Covey called him back 30 minutes later. Where did you get this? Anonymous tip. This is real, Covey said flatly, but it's buried. I've never seen a file rerouted through this many private contractor systems. Somebody didn't just want her gone. They wanted her untraceable. This isn't just witness protection. This is off-the-books relocation. I've seen it before in trafficking cases when local officials are compromised. Shaq sat back, his mind racing. And the kid? If Selena's under protection, any dependent would be ghosted with her. That girl shouldn't be anywhere near this place. If Amira's in the open, someone slipped up or someone panicked. Shaq remembered that moment again. The way Amira had looked at him. The fear in Selena's eyes. It wasn't just the recognition. It was the realization that the walls were caving in. One mistake, one unscheduled day, one decision to bring her daughter to work, and now everything was coming undone. He ended the call and stared out the window as the Savannah sun turned white-hot against the glass. Somewhere nearby, Selena was hiding again. Maybe not willingly, maybe not safely. And Amira? She was just a child caught between a mother's secrets and a father's absence. But now he was no longer absent. Shaq left the hotel in plain clothes and walked to the old historic district again, this time to a rundown building tucked behind an abandoned train depot. On the second floor was a name he remembered from years ago: Jeremiah Kane, ex-security supervisor from one of Shaq's New Jersey properties. Jeremiah had retired early, went back south, and now ran a private investigation service, quiet, legal, and off-grid. Jeremiah opened the door wearing jeans, a tank top, and suspicion. "I knew it was you," he said. "You got bigger." "Life did that," Shaq replied. They sat in his office, surrounded by old boxes of files and two barking dogs behind a half-closed door. Shaq slid the file across the desk. "You ever hear of Selena Wells?" Jeremiah studied the name, then looked up. "Yeah, back in the day. Worked catering at one of your events. You were doing some foundation thing in Trenton. She was smart, sweet, stayed out the way, but she had a quiet anger to her, like she'd seen too much. She was there in '95, Shaq said, and she had a baby 9 months later. I think it's mine." Jeremiah leaned back. "That explains why she vanished." "You heard something?" "I heard she was trying to report labor abuse. Got close to a big case. One of those hush-hush things where people suddenly stop showing up to work. No one looked for her because no one knew her last name. She kept it locked down." Shaq nodded slowly. "She's working at the Magnolia Crown. Or was, until she wasn't." Jeremiah narrowed his eyes. "That place? It's got rot behind the walls, man. Been hearing about it for years. Immigrant workers, off-the-books hires. A housekeeper jumped from the 4th floor last winter. Police ruled it a suicide, but she'd filed a complaint the week before." "She's in trouble," Shaq said. "Her daughter, too." Jeremiah stood. "Then let's make noise." Back at the hotel, Shaq took a different path. Not through the front lobby, not through the staff corridor, but through a maintenance stairwell that led him out beside the garden kitchen. He waited. And then he saw her. Not Selena, but the older woman from 3 days ago. Housekeeping. The one who'd looked away when he said hello. She moved with purpose, not fear. She carried herself like someone who'd worked through storms. If anyone knew where Selena was, it was her. Shaq approached her gently. "Ma'am, I need 2 minutes." She froze, eyeing him. "You don't know me," he said, "but I think I'm the father of a little girl who called me dad in this hotel. Selena's daughter, Amira." The woman's mouth tightened. Her hands didn't move. "I'm not here to cause problems. I just want to help. I need to find them." She looked over her shoulder, then spoke, low and fast. "They moved her. Day after you saw the girl. Said she violated protocol. Some private car took her out the service lot. No record. She left everything behind." Shaq's breath caught. "Where?" "They don't say where, just say she won't be back. That she was relocated. But that's not how it works. That's not relocation. That's disappearance." The woman looked him dead in the eye. "Selena wasn't just cleaning your room. She was documenting. Notes, pictures, payroll slips. She had a burner phone. She was gonna go public." "Did she tell anyone?" "She told me." "Do you have anything?" She pulled a small notepad from her waistband and handed it over. The pages were covered in neat handwriting. Room assignments, initials, names, numbers, dates. At the bottom, underlined 3 times. "Shaq, child knows. Do not run again." He looked up. "Did she leave this for me?" "She didn't get a chance to leave anything. I took it from her locker. You want the truth? Start with the basement." Shaq nodded, eyes hot. He turned to go. But before he did, she added, "She didn't vanish because she was weak. She vanished because she scared them. You scare them now too." As he walked back toward the elevator, the walls of the Magnolia Crown seemed smaller, more desperate, less untouchable. The hotel wasn't hiding her out of loyalty. It was hiding from the story she could tell. And now that story had found its way into the hands of someone big enough to carry it forward, and loud enough to make sure no one ever erased her again. In some buildings, secrets don't live in the attic, they rot beneath the floorboards. There were places inside the Magnolia Crown that didn't show up on blueprints, places not listed on fire escape maps or employee orientation tours. Shaq had already sensed them. Hidden corridors, locked rooms without names, staff-only areas that no one seemed to enter unless they were sure no one was watching. But now he wasn't just watching. He was following the trail. The woman from housekeeping hadn't just given him names or stories. She had handed him something harder. Proof. And with that came direction. Start with the basement. It wasn't listed on the elevator panel, not even in service mode. The only stairway that descended lower than the first floor was tucked behind the West Wing's laundry center, behind a door labeled linen storage. It blended into the rest of the hotel's polished back corridors. clean and unassuming, with fresh white paint and soft LED lighting. But the smell told a different story. Must, moisture, and something faintly metallic. Shaq waited until the hallway was empty, then slipped inside. The room was narrow, lined with industrial carts, stacked towels, detergent bottles, and crates marked for disposal. He scanned the walls and found what he was looking for, an old metal grate near the floor, hinged at the edge, partially obscured by a wheeled hamper. He pulled it aside. There, behind it, was a worn wooden hatch set flush into the tile. It was older than everything around it, unrestored, scratched, its metal latch rusted from decades of disuse. Except someone had used it. Recently, the lock was loose, the latch worn. He pulled it up. Stale air rushed up from the dark. He descended slowly, one step at a time, the wood stairs creaking under his weight. The temperature dropped fast. The glow from the hallway vanished, replaced by a dim utility bulb hung by a frayed cord. As his eyes adjusted, the space came into view. It wasn't large, but it was layered. Half storage, half history. Stone walls sealed in concrete. Pipes snaked across the ceiling. Old iron hooks lined one wall. A steel utility shelf held plastic tubs labeled with years. 2005, 2006, 2007, 2009, and so on. But what caught his eye was the desk in the corner. It was old, but not abandoned. A metal drawer hung open. Inside were files, worn, mismatched, and incomplete. He pulled one out. A time card log. Names, ID numbers, check-ins, room assignments. Half the pages were redacted. Others were simply crossed out. Then he found it. Selena Wells. ID SW113. Assigned rooms 302, 404, 510. Last logged activity, Thursday, 8:41 a.m. After that, a blank space where an end time should have been. He kept flipping. Dependent logged A. Wells. The only entry under the family notification registry. His breath hitched. Amira's name, scribbled in the same pen, the same day. The box checked beside it, on premises. Beneath that, 2 letters in thick red ink. X. No explanation. No further notes. Shaq ran his hand along the edge of the drawer, trying to stay steady. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't mismanagement. This was record-keeping for something that shouldn't have existed. He moved to the second drawer. More documents, some typed, others handwritten. Contracts, agreements. Several were signed only with initials. One file had a photo paper-clipped to the front, a young woman in a blue housekeeping uniform, standing by a service cart. Shaq didn't recognize her. The label, KB02. Termination date, 04/16/22. Cause, failure to comply with discretion protocols. There was no real cause listed, just the kind of language that concealed decisions behind professionalism. One by one, he counted the files. Dozens, maybe more. And every single name had either been crossed out or marked inactive, except one. A blank folder labeled S. O'Neal, external visitor, inquiry flagged, escalate if persistent. There were no pages inside, not yet. They had started documenting him. He took photos of everything, every folder, every log sheet, every redacted name. He wasn't going to let it disappear if he couldn't prove it. His hands shook only slightly as he held the phone steady, scanning page after page. Then, at the bottom of the drawer, he found a key. It was brass, taped to an index card that read, Room B7, restricted access. He scanned the basement and spotted a side door half obscured behind shelving. He walked over, inserted the key, and turned it. The lock clicked open. Inside was a smaller room, 8 by 8 at most, lined with black file cabinets and a folding table. A single bulb flickered above. The temperature dropped again. There were photographs pinned to the wall. Not decorative, surveillance. Photos of staff walking in and out of the service entrance, time-stamped. Some blurry, some sharp. Several showed Selena alone, head down, entering at dawn, or slipping out after sunset. One showed her with Amira. The child's face was turned slightly, but the fear was unmistakable. The photo was dated 2 days before Shaq arrived. Someone had been watching her. Closely. He moved to the file cabinets. Most were locked, but the third drawer opened. Inside, printouts of identification documents, some clearly fake, others real but marked void, birth certificates with mismatched parent names, school withdrawal forms, immigration files, NDAs. Shaq felt his pulse pound in his ears. This wasn't mismanagement. This was organization. A full network of undocumented workers processed and rotated in silence, built to clean the crown's floors and disappear from its memory. Except they weren't gone. They were erased. He snapped more photos, keeping the folder in his bag. He looked at the last page on the table, a plain sheet of white paper with 5 names typed on it. One was Selena Wells, another was Amira Wells. Next to both, a single word, relocated. But the other 3 names were marked hold. Hold for what? Movement behind him broke the stillness. He turned. Nothing. But the faintest shift of air came from a vent overhead, an airflow that hadn't been running before. He stepped back, aware now that this wasn't just an abandoned sub-basement. This space was live, monitored, designed to keep secrets in place. He made his way back to the trapdoor carefully, pulling it shut behind him and covering it with the hamper he'd moved earlier. Back in the hallway, the sounds of a normal hotel returned. Room service carts, faint elevator dings, laughter in the distance. But Shaq wasn't the same man who'd walked in. He took the service stairwell back to his room, dropped the backpack on the bed, and stared at the files. Names erased, dependents tracked, rooms reassigned without explanation. They weren't just cleaning rooms. They were cleaning people. Selena hadn't just been documenting injustice, she had become part of its evidence. And Amira, she was never meant to be seen. Her very presence was a liability. A crack in the Crown's system, a daughter who remembered a face, a father who finally looked back. Now everything was exposed. But the exposure came with risk. Shaq's name was already in their files, which meant the countdown had begun. You can silence a voice, but you can't unwrite a document. The air in Savannah was different that morning. Not just heavy with heat, but with history. Shaq felt it pressing down on him like an unspoken verdict, thick and still, as if the whole city were holding its breath. After what he'd seen in the basement, the files, the fake names, the surveillance, there was no doubt left. The Magnolia Crown wasn't simply negligent. It wasn't just broken. It was an engine fueled by silence and buried bodies, not literal ones, but lives crushed under layers of contracts, erased records, undocumented shifts and pay stubs that never saw a ledger. And now, someone was starting to talk. The name came to him in a voicemail that arrived in the early morning hours. A raspy male voice, slow but deliberate. "You're not the first to try, but you might be the loudest. I've been waiting for someone like you. Name's Jeremiah Klein. I know what they did to her. Meet me." No callback number, just a location, an address outside the city, near a broken-down church on the edge of the riverbanks. Shaq arrived just past noon. The building was half collapsed, vines climbing over cracked wood and sun-bleached stone. Out front sat an old Lincoln, its paint eaten away by time. The man leaning against it looked like he'd lived through everything twice. Worn denim shirt, yellowed cigarette between his fingers, thick folder clutched in his hand like a weapon. "You really showed," the man said as Shaq approached. "You're Jeremiah?" Shaq asked. "Last time I checked." They shook hands. Jeremiah's grip was calloused, dry, deliberate. "You know Selena?" Shaq asked. Jeremiah exhaled a slow breath. "I knew what she was trying to do. I just didn't know she'd try to do it again. Thought she was gone for good." Shaq motioned toward the folder. "That it? This is the piece they buried." Jeremiah opened it slowly, revealing a thick stack of aged pages stamped with official seals. The first page bore the heading, U.S. District Court, Class Action Filing, Civil Case Navo 6, CV 8747, Wells v. TMC Holdings, DBA Magnolia Crown Group. Shaq's eyes narrowed. "You mean to tell me there was a federal lawsuit filed back then?" "Filed, submitted, validated, all of it," Jeremiah said. "It was gaining traction. Civil rights violations, labor code infractions, trafficking allegations, names, affidavits, time cards, all lined up. Selena was one of 5 lead witnesses, only one with physical documentation. And then, Jeremiah turned to the next page, a motion to delay the hearing. She missed her prep call 3 days before the deposition. Never showed. No one could reach her. We thought she skipped. Press assumed cold feet. Judge sealed the case when all 5 witnesses dropped out. Dropped out? Shaq asked, incredulous. Every one of them disappeared. Shaq stepped back. You mean literally vanished? 4 moved out of state. 1 overdosed. Selena was never seen again until now. At least not officially. I've been waiting for someone else to poke the wound. The second this thing got traction, the hotel paid off 2 advocacy orgs, moved cash through shell companies, and everyone shut their mouths. He handed Shaq a page from deeper in the stack. It was an internal memo, marked Confidential Legal Risk Assessment, from the Crown's parent company. It listed names with exposure potential, risk scores, and recommendations. Next to Selena Wells, high risk, recommend terminate relationship immediately. Shaq stared at the word, terminate. That ain't HR language, Jeremiah muttered. That's corporate code for get them out of the picture, one way or another. He pointed at another line, buried near the bottom. Subject may have dependent, possible leverage. Shaq's jaw tensed. They used Amira, or planned to. They were watching both of them. Selena tried to keep the girl invisible, but you showing up changed everything. That kid sees your face, speaks out. Now the system that was built to forget her is collapsing. Shaq felt the weight of it, not guilt, responsibility, gravity. His name had cracked open something no one else could. You still practicing? He asked. Jeremiah smirked bitterly. They took my license 4 years ago for a technicality. Truth is, they just didn't like what I knew. But I've got copies, I've got testimonies, I've got everything we need to bring it back. To who? Shaq asked. Who's left to trust? Jeremiah's face hardened. Nobody. That's why we don't bring it to them. He tapped the folder. We bring it to them. The public, the press, the people. Not courtrooms where papers disappear. We put this in front of cameras, senators, students. That's the only way to get ahead of them. Shaq took the folder in his hands. There was something cold about it, like it had absorbed the weight of every person silenced beneath it. It didn't scream. It didn't beg. It just waited quietly for someone to carry it forward. What happens if we lose? Shaq asked, voice low. Jeremiah met his eyes. Then at least it won't die in the dark. Back in his suite that night, Shaq laid the documents across the bed like a blueprint. His mind moved like a machine now, connecting dots, lining up timelines, organizing everything Selena had risked her life to uncover. Selena hadn't vanished out of fear. She had been removed because she wouldn't stop documenting. Amira hadn't been an accident. She was the one variable they couldn't control. And Shaq, he'd been written off, just another celebrity too busy for the fine print. But now he had the fine print. He had the photos, the whistleblower files, the records from the basement, the surveillance logs, the staff lists, the redacted memos. He had the lawsuit they tried to kill in silence. And it was time to make it loud. He picked up the hotel phone and dialed a number from his private list. Carmen Bell, a major network journalist who owed him one. Her work had taken down banks and bought down senators. If anyone could run with this without flinching, it was her. It's Shaq, he said when she answered. I've got something you need to see. It's time the Magnolia Crown lost its mask. There was silence on the line. Then Carmen spoke. I'll be on the next flight. What happens when the one thing they tried to erase walks into a lobby and calls you dad? Shaq had held trophies, gold ones, gleaming. He'd lifted banners, heard crowds roar, stood under the weight of legacy. But nothing had ever felt heavier than the folder now tucked under his arm. The lawsuit, the memos, the files, the silence made loud. And now he knew why it all started unraveling. Because of a girl who walked into a hotel lobby, looked up at him with wide, fearless eyes, and called him dad. She wasn't supposed to exist, and yet she had become the single most undeniable fact in the entire lie. Carmen Bell arrived within 18 hours, her crew trimmed and mobile, no trucks or satellite dishes, just a tight core of documentary producers, editors, and one trusted cameraman. They set up in a private suite Shaq reserved under a pseudonym 2 blocks from the Magnolia Crown. There, Shaq laid it all out. The whistleblower records, the basement logs, the surveillance photos, the erased staff, the lawsuit that was buried in 2006. He explained everything in one continuous, unbroken line, until the room fell quiet. Carmen didn't flinch. She simply said, "Where's the girl?" And that was the question that mattered most. Because Amira wasn't in a safe house. She wasn't in the hotel anymore. She wasn't on paper. And until now, she hadn't even been in the system. Selena had made sure of that. 2 hours later, the burner phone Shaq had been guarding vibrated on the table. A single text appeared. If you're ready, meet me alone. No press, no law, just you. 14 Sycamore Lane, back entrance. Shaq stood without hesitation. He didn't tell Carmen. Didn't bring a file. Didn't take a phone except the burner. He drove himself through the narrow back streets of Savannah, away from the hotel, away from the safety net of influence and visibility. He parked outside an old duplex framed by weeping willow branches, its wood paint faded to the color of memory. A single porch light flickered on the back side, casting a soft glow over cracked stone steps. Selena opened the door before he could knock. Her face wasn't afraid. It was exhausted. Trimmed short hair, no makeup, clothes practical, but her eyes sharp, still fierce. Shaq stepped in. The air smelled like cinnamon and dust. Inside, the place was clean but barely furnished. One couch, a floor lamp, a suitcase tucked under the table, a folded blanket on the armrest. Then she stepped out from the hallway. Amira. The same girl. Same bold gaze. She didn't run to him. She just stood there, watching, as if she wasn't surprised, as if she'd known he'd come. Shaq knelt to eye level, voice steady. "You okay?" She nodded once. "Good," he said softly. "I missed you." She didn't say it back, but she sat next to him on the couch and leaned gently against his arm, like it was where she'd always belonged. Selena remained standing. Shaq turned toward her. "Why now?" She sighed, and it was the sound of someone finally too tired to hide. "Because I ran out of places to bury the truth. Because Amira saw your face and said your name before I could stop her. Because this hotel, this town, this whole damn machine was never going to let us go." Shaq studied her. "They tried to erase you."
They almost did. She sat down. They almost made me believe I didn't matter. Why keep her hidden?
Because I had to. Because she wasn't safe if she existed on paper. No birth certificate. No social security. No doctor records under her real name. I homeschooled her, paid in cash, moved when people started asking questions. I had to raise her like a ghost, and I did, until now. "But she's not a ghost," Shaq said. "No," Selena answered. "She's a flame. She wants the world. She deserves the world." Shaq turned to Amira. She was flipping through a small sketchpad, doodling a figure, a man with a bald head and big hands, holding the hand of a little girl. "You told her about me?" "Never. I didn't have to." She asked questions, looked at old pictures. "You were everywhere, Shaq. The world loved you. She found you on her own. She remembered my face. She claimed it." Shaq swallowed. "She's mine." Selena didn't reply. She didn't need to. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Inside was a single page, an affidavit, voluntary paternity, already notarized. "I don't want to take her," he said. "I want to protect her, stand next to her, fight for her." Selena studied the paper. "They'll come after us harder now. Let them. This time it won't just be cover-ups and firings. This time it's exposure. This time we make noise, and they'll try to bury us with it." Shaq shook his head. "No, not again. Not this time." She finally signed. That night they stayed in the house. Shaq slept on the floor while Amira curled up on the couch beside her mother. The world outside was still watching, but inside that house there was a stillness that felt like the first breath after drowning. By morning, Carmen had already prepped the story for a national exclusive. She agreed to hold it 72 hours to give them time to prepare, secure safe housing, alert legal aid. But the wheels were already turning. News crews had begun hovering outside the Magnolia Crown. A few staff had gone silent. One former worker, anonymous, leaked text messages confirming under-the-table payments and erased shifts. And a new name surfaced. Kirk Hanover, the hotel's chief operating officer, who had signed off on dozens of relocation memos tied to undocumented workers. One of the notes Carmen unearthed included a coded line: "Remove SW, immediately. Child contact confirmed." Selena hadn't just been watched. She had been hunted. Back at the suite, Shaq stood with Amira in front of the window, looking out at the city she was never supposed to know. She pointed at the skyline. "Is that where you work?" "No," he said. "It's where they pretend to work. My work starts now." "Are you famous?" she asked. He smiled. "Some people think so." "Are you rich?" He chuckled. "Yeah." "Then why'd you come looking for me?" He paused, heart full. "Because rich doesn't mean a thing if you know you left someone behind." She nodded, like she understood. Later that evening, the three of them left the safe house under escort, now legally protected under federal scrutiny. Shaq held Amira's hand as they stepped into a black SUV bound for Atlanta. Carmen would release the story the next morning. The Magnolia Crown would be named. The files would be published. And the world would finally hear what the hotel tried so hard to silence. Selena, the woman who vanished. Amira, the girl who wasn't supposed to exist. And Big Shaq, the man who refused to forget. Because now the truth had a name, a face and a voice. And it called him Dad. He had walked away from battles before, but not this time. Shaq had been in front of cameras more times than he could count, under stadium lights, in endorsement spots, even at funeral podiums when legends fell. But none of those moments prepared him for this one. The podium set against a wall of microphones, the faces of journalists who weren't here for gossip, and the weight of two people standing quietly beside him. Selena. Strong, composed, no longer shrinking behind shadows. Jeremiah. Weathered, steady, carrying the memory of a battle unfinished. And Amira, just out of view, sitting on a low bench near the corner, her sketchpad in her lap, her head tilted curiously toward the rising noise. They chose a neutral location, an old civic hall in Atlanta, surrounded by community organizers, press representatives, and advocacy groups who had been ignored too long. This wasn't just a media stunt, this was a reckoning. Carmen Bell had timed the release precisely. 10 minutes before the conference, the first wave of documents dropped online. Redacted employee rosters. Photographs from the basement. The lawsuit buried in 2006. The relocation memos. The anonymous statements. Shaq's team had compiled everything, and Carmen's network had verified each line before pressing publish. When Shaq stepped to the microphone, the flash of cameras didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a challenge. "I'm here," he began, his voice steady but filled with weight. "Not as a celebrity, not as a former athlete. I'm here as a father, and as a witness." The room went still. "For the past several weeks," he continued, "I've uncovered something happening inside one of this country's most prestigious hotels. The Magnolia Crown in Savannah, Georgia, isn't what it appears to be. Behind its walls, a system of undocumented labor trafficking has thrived, built on silence, fear, and targeted erasure." He paused. "I didn't go looking for this story. It came looking for me, in the eyes of a little girl who recognized my face before I even remembered hers." Selena stepped forward then, her face calm but fierce. "My name is Selena Wells. 15 years ago, I attempted to testify in a federal case against the Crown's parent company for unlawful labor practices and racial discrimination. Before I could speak, I was removed from the witness list. I was threatened, isolated. I went into hiding, and I raised my daughter off-grid because I believed she'd be safer that way." Shaq continued. "But hiding didn't erase the truth. Amira, the child the system tried to erase, broke through the silence just by saying one word. Dad. That word cracked open every lie that came after it." Cameras clicked. The front row leaned forward. Jeremiah took the mic next. 4 women filed complaints against the Magnolia Crown between 2004 and 2008. All vanished from the legal process before the case could go to trial. I was part of the legal team that watched their stories disappear, but we never lost the documents. We never lost the truth. We've kept them safe, waiting for the right moment. This is that moment. Shaq returned to the center. The people running that hotel, Kirk Hanover, the board of TMC Holdings, they signed memos authorizing what they called removals and reassignments, but what they were doing was burying people, disappearing them. He held up a folder. "This is the truth, and we are putting it in front of the world." The room exploded with questions, flashing lights and shouts, reporters trying to confirm names, timelines, lawsuits, but none of it flustered Shaq. Not now. He didn't answer every question. He didn't need to. He said enough. When the conference ended, the impact was immediate. News outlets across the country ran the footage. Hashtags surged. Nagmalia exposed. Abira exists. Advocacy groups began staging protests outside the Magnolia Crown by evening. By midnight, the Georgia Attorney General's office had issued a formal inquiry into TMC Holdings. Subpoenas were being drafted. Depositions scheduled. The Crown went into lockdown. Their corporate lawyers issued a brief, dismissive statement. "We deny any and all allegations and will cooperate with legal proceedings." But it was too late. The narrative had already shifted. And this time, it wasn't just rumor. It was truth with evidence. Back at the hotel suite, Amira flipped through a news channel and paused when she saw herself a still image from her school sketchbook, the photo now framed in the corner of a national broadcast.
"They showed my drawing," she whispered.
Shaq sat beside her. "You drew it. They can't ignore it now." Amira looked up at him. "I don't want to be hidden anymore." "You won't be." Selena stood by the window, arms crossed but face lighter than it had been in years. "I thought I was protecting her," she said, "by keeping her invisible, but I was keeping her small." "You were surviving," Shaq replied, "and you saved her life doing it." She nodded. "But now it's time to live." The knock came late, one of Carmen's producers holding a thick folder. "Federal protection program has been fast-tracked. We have full legal immunity for Selena, retroactive protection status, and permanent documentation for Amira." Shaq exhaled. They had air now. They had time. They had safety. He stepped into the bedroom and closed the door, sat at the edge of the bed, and let the quiet fill the space. This wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, the silence wasn't working against them. Because the world had finally heard what the Magnolia Crown spent decades trying to erase. And the father who once walked away from fights had now picked the loudest one of his life on behalf of a daughter who never stopped believing he'd come. And now, he wasn't leaving. You can't change the past, but you can choose how to live with it. Some endings don't come with silence, they come with signatures. 3 weeks after the press conference, in a small courthouse just outside Atlanta, Shaq stood in front of a judge in a private closed-door proceeding. The courtroom wasn't grand. No marble columns, no reporters, no flashbulbs. Just a bench, a few rows of wooden seats, and the sound of Amira's pencil scratching quietly in her lap as she drew something only she understood. The judge, a soft-spoken woman with silver-streaked braids and a calm gaze, glanced between the paperwork and Shaq, then over to Selena. "This petition is unopposed?" "It is," Selena said clearly. "Fully. And you're consenting to full parental guardianship under the state of Georgia?" "I am." The judge nodded. "And you, Mr. O'Neal, do you understand the terms of this adoption?" Shaq looked down at Amira, who had just finished drawing a podium, 2 stick figures, and a giant heart in the sky. "I understand," he said. "And do you accept her? Not as a responsibility, but as your daughter?" Shaq didn't hesitate. "She was mine before I knew her name." The judge smiled, tapped the gavel lightly, and said 4 words that cracked something wide open in the air. "Then it's official today." Amira looked up. Shaq opened his arms. She walked right into them. Outside, no one knew what had happened. No paparazzi, no cameras, just a man and a girl walking out of a building with new paperwork, and a name stitched tighter to their hearts. Back at the safe apartment where they were staying, furnished temporarily through a federal witness support initiative, Selena stood on the balcony, staring out into the tray line. "They finally shut it down," she said, eyes fixed on her phone. Shaq joined her. "The Crown?" "Completely. Raided yesterday morning. All operations suspended. 3 board members arrested. Kirk Hanover surrendered to federal custody. Sealed documents released. Charges pending across 2 states. "And the workers?" "They're being found," Selena said. "They're being pulled out of the shadows, one by one. Some will never come forward, but some are already speaking." Shaq nodded slowly. "Took too long." "It always does," she replied. "But we got here." Inside, Amira had taken over the guest room. On the far wall she had taped up her drawings, sketches of what her life used to look like, and what it looked like now. One showed a cracked trapdoor with a light rising from beneath it. Another showed a hotel with chains breaking from its windows. But the centerpiece was new. A bold crayon-colored image of a stage. On it, a tall man stood behind a podium. Beside him, a little girl held his hand. Above them, a speech bubble hovered. Inside it, "You found me." When Shaq saw it, his throat tightened. He didn't need to ask what it meant. She had been waiting. And she wasn't hiding anymore. The weeks that followed moved faster than expected. The labor exploitation case led to a full federal inquiry into the hospitality industry's subcontractor networks. Lawmakers proposed the Invisible Labor Protection Act with bipartisan support. Advocacy groups rolled out hotel labor watch lists and education programs, and a wave of hotels across the Southeast began voluntarily reviewing their hiring and payment systems. Carmen Bell's full-length documentary, Erased: The Story They Tried to Bury, aired on 3 networks and reached over 40 million views online within its first week. In it, Shaq didn't talk as a celebrity. He talked as a father, as a man who missed a life-changing truth, as someone who finally caught up to the people trying to bury it. Selena's interview aired last. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She said, "I stayed hidden because I had no power, but now my daughter has it." And she was right. Amira didn't walk like a girl on borrowed time anymore. She walked like she belonged. They moved into a quiet home just outside Atlanta, not too far from the school district Shaq had helped fund years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him, building systems for strangers while not knowing his own child had never had a classroom of her own. But now she had one. Her first day of school came with nerves. Not fear, just unfamiliarity. She held Shaq's hand a little tighter than usual at the school gates. She carried a backpack twice her size, a new notebook, and a pencil box labeled A. O'Neal. Selena had asked, weeks earlier, what name they should give her. Shaq hadn't answered. But Amira had. She chose it herself. Not to erase where she came from, but to choose who stood beside her. And the first time the teacher called it aloud, Amira smiled. That night, after homework and pancakes for dinner, they sat together on the living room rug. Selena on one side, Shaq on the other, Amira in the middle, telling stories about the day, about classmates, about colors and songs. And for a long moment, it was quiet. Not empty. Just full. Shaq looked over at Selena. You ever think it would end like this? She laughed gently. This isn't the end. No, he said. It's just the part where we stop running. She nodded, and start building. Amira rolled onto her back and looked up at the ceiling. Can we go visit the old hotel? Shaq and Selena exchanged a glance. Why? He asked. To see if it's still quiet, she replied. Shaq leaned down, brushed a curl from her forehead. It probably is, he said, but it's not our kind of quiet anymore. She grinned. Good. That night, before bed, she taped one last drawing to the wall above her headboard. It was the simplest of them all, just a stick figure of her standing on a hill. Beneath it, 3 words in crooked handwriting. I am here. And she was. Visible, protected, whole. The system that tried to erase her failed. Because truth doesn't vanish. It finds new names. And builds new futures. If this story stirred something in you, it's because it's not just fiction, it's reflection. Look closer at the places we praise, and ask who's missing from the picture. Every erased voice deserves an amplifier. Every hidden name deserves daylight. The truth didn't end here, it just found its voice. What you do next decides how loud it echoes.